So the word theology means the study of God. So there's systematic theology, process theology, constructive theology, liberation theology, feminist theology, black theology, Asian theology, Orthodox theology, to name a few different names of theology. All have different approach to study of God. And then there are theologies named after animals. Dog theology goes like this: you feed me, you pet me, you shelter me, you love me, you must be God. Cat theology goes like this: you feed me, you pet me, you shelter me, you love me, I must be God. And then we have a squirrel theology. Squirrel. Now, the way squirrels live their lives puts them on a different theological plane than dogs or cats. Simply, squirrel theology is summarized in one word: nut. All squirrels' abilities and existence are centered in a single-minded purpose: nut. And because of that single-minded purpose, that they find joy in every moment as though it is the only one that matters: nuts. Today I want to drive you nuts. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we are to go nuts. All our abilities and existence are centered on that single-minded purpose and passion to pursue God's righteousness as we follow Jesus. So go nuts. By the way, I think four-letter words, nuts, is an acronym to never underestimate the squirrel. So today we are on the fourth movement, the last movement in the Way of Disciples, the worship series, the sermon series, which started 4 Sundays ago. And we are focusing on about the ethics of disciples, the ethical standard that Jesus expects his disciples to exemplify to the world. How we should live our life as disciples of Jesus Christ so that the world would know us as Christians. In other words, nuts. Because if we are to live out the teachings of Jesus, especially in today's text, Matthew 5 to Matthew 7, then the world would call us nuts, like they call Jesus nuts. So let's just take a look at our text this morning. Chapter 5, verse 17 Jesus goes like this: I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill the law. And Jesus refrains of the law. He just refrains it. He said, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, and then he goes on, but I say to you. So he says, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times that you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And then Jesus goes on to reframe the ancient law with this formula. It's applying this new way of ethical and religious life from the old, concerning not only on anger, but also about adultery, divorce, about making all oaths, retaliation, loving, almsgiving, about prayer, about fasting, about money, about serving, about righteousness. And this goes on, chapter 5 and chapter 6. And he goes on, you have heard, this is what you have heard, but I say to you, and he applies all of this, reframes the law as he fulfills. So what we have in one hand is a list of ethical and religious standards that the Hebrew people received from their ancestors that guided their behaviors and established a certain order in society and in their relationships, a set of kind of legal, binding, ethical, and religious codes that were championed mostly by the scribes and Pharisees, the religious leaders of their time, and that would constitute as being righteous. If you follow this, you will be righteous, right? Now Jesus turns the whole thing inside and out and upside and down. He says, you have heard, And if you follow this old set of legal principles, you'll be considered righteous by a lot of people, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Now I'm going to give you another principle, and this is how it's going to be. He's not departing or abolishing the old laws and penal code system, but fulfilling them by radically expanding them, by giving them a guiding principle for both inner and outer person, a standard that would govern person's character and behaviors, which is, in other words, what's right in the God's eyes. So that's what he begins with chapter 5, verse 20. He begins with this saying, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." An ethical standard and behavior that's right in the eyes of God. So as disciples of Jesus Christ, we are called not to abolish, but to fulfill the law. And this requires an uncommon wisdom and courage. It requires us to follow the spirit of law more than the letters of law. Risk-taking more than preserving self or status quo. And even seen as nuts. And if the word will call us crazy and nuts, that's great, because Jesus was called crazy and nuts as he saw God's righteousness in this world. When people call us nuts, that's a compliment, right? So, what's the main nuts behavior? Well, first of all, nuts go full out on a limb. Where do you see the squirrels most often? Well, you see two places. First, high up on a tiny branch, 40 or 50 feet in the air, clinging to a scrawny twig, almost hanging by a thread, a very precarious place or position. Followers of Christ will find themselves out on a limb from time to time. What helps to bring in the kingdom and reveal God's righteousness isn't always the most popular stance. You will stick out, you will be stared at, you will even time to time be judged and treated harshly because your stance as a nut. Seeking God's kingdom may put you in a precarious position at work and at school, in the community, and even in the church. Nuts go out on a limb. What other place do you encounter squirrels most often? Well, on the busy streets, right? Busy streets. I'm not sure, but I think some squirrels must have this death wish. I don't know why they wait until the vehicles come close and dash across the street, trying to beat their car, But they just wait until the street's all clear and then cross the street. They must have this death wish. Or maybe they're just betting each other. See if you can beat this car. I can, I dare you. And there's some kind of betting going on. Some of them go full out on a limb. And most of the time they beat the cars, right? It's those who stop in the middle of the road trying to go back, change their mind in the middle of the road, get squashed. Nuts for Christ often means taking risk. Go full out on a limb. Don't look back. Don't turn around and go back and get squashed. Go full out on a limb to risk all, to gain all. People didn't understand the disciples. Why the disciples risked everything to follow Jesus, to live for God's righteousness. They were a bunch of nuts. They went full out on a limb, taking risks along the way, sacrificed and suffered, even died. And that's what Jesus said over and over again. He told disciples over and over again, if you want to live, you need to die. You need to risk, you need to sacrifice, you need to suffer. You need to learn how to die well in order to live well. And that's how the world will know us as Christians, how the world knew disciples as the followers of Jesus Christ, a bunch of nuts. Right? I mean, unless you are totally nuts, you wouldn't live like this. Unless you are wired completely different. I mean, how is it possible to love my enemies? Unless you are nuts. How is it possible to forgive 7 times 77 unless you're completely nuts? How is it possible to only to be happy with a daily bread and not worrying about tomorrow unless you are nuts? How is it possible to not resist evildoer unless you are nuts? How is it possible to not defend, protect myself and my life, my family's well-being are in danger unless you are nuts? How is it possible not to strike back when someone hits you on your face? How is it possible to give my coat to somebody when that's the only coat I have in this cold winter weather? How is it possible not be angry unless you are nuts? I mean, that's not possible. That's not realistic. That's crazy and nuts. That's ideal, but not practical, and most likely will get us killed. So, some thought what Jesus had taught were ideal. Maybe when the kingdom of God comes in full power, we might be able to live like that. But not certainly for those of us living here and now, Christians or not. There's great suggestions, but just not possible, because that's totally nuts. So the Sermon on the Mount has confounded and confused and bewildered many people as set of ideal principles, but not practical ways for us to live by. Well, when we look at our history, every great human advancement in civilization that made humans better beings than before, that ushered us to next level of moral person, were initiated, inspired by individuals who tried to live out this impossible set of principles throughout their lives. Without the nuts in our history, we wouldn't be where we are as civilized human beings. There were plenty of nuts in the past and even in the present time. As you know, that February is the Black History Month. And we think about Martin Luther King Jr., and his tireless effort to bring civil rights movement for all races through non-violent means. Demonstrate and demand for the right, but do not bear arms to strike back. So there were many marches, and while many of them got beat up, they did not strike back. He was a nut for seeking God's righteousness in this world. And because he wasn't so nuts, we have become much better people than before. A better society, a better world in terms of how we relate with those who are different than us. Most of you know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolent ideal and practice originated both from the teachings of Jesus, where Jesus said in Matthew 5:39, today's reading, do not resist evildoer. Comes from that passage, as well as the lessons he has learned from Mahatma Gandhi from India. Another original nut who has tirelessly and fearlessly fought against colonial power back in 1800, when Gandhi demanded British to loosen the grip of colonial power over India. Gandhi's tactic was very simple, non-violent movement. Just march, and if the soldiers strike you and beat you up, do not strike back. Many people said, that would not work. That's so nuts. But eventually, the marches and the demonstrations that were grounded on that non-violent principle won the hearts of millions and eventually paved the way for the liberation of India from Great Britain. And of course, Gandhi was inspired by the teachings of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, and the principle of non-resisting evildoer, today's passage. But he was also deeply inspired by the great Russian writer, peace activist, and Christians, a nut, Count Leo Tolstoy. The one who wrote such classics as War and Peace, Resurrection, Anna Karenina. Some of you read his classic novels. See, Leo Tolstoy was converted to Christianity late in his life, when he was around 50 years old. After many years of soul searching and studying the gospel of Jesus Christ, and when he got to the passage of the Sermon on the Mount, and the verse, chapter 5, verse 39, do not resist evildoer, Word, he said he had that epiphany, and that eventually helped him to convert to Christianity. And this is what he said. He says, Christ does not say that a man strike your cheek and suffer, but he says, do not resist evil. Whatever man may do to you, do not resist evil. These words, do not resist evil and wicked man, thus apprehended, were the clue that made all clear to me. And I was surprised I could have here, though, treated them in such a different way. Christ meant to say, whatever man may do to you, bear, suffer, and submit, but never resist evil. And then he goes on to say, we may bring forward as an objection the difficulty of always obeying such a law. We may even say, as unbelievers do, that it is a foolish doctrine that Christ was a dreamer, an idealist who gave precepts that are impossible to follow. But whatever our objections may be, we cannot deny that Christ expresses his meaning most clearly and distinctively, and his meaning is that man must not resist evil. He who fully accepts his teaching cannot resist evil. Tolstoy was an original Knox, and his teachings of nonviolent principle had influenced many in the world, inspired many Knox like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., and many more. But Tolstoy was not the first and original of the idea of this nonviolent movement, based on Matthew chapter 5, verse 39. In his book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, Tolstoy speaks about this principle, about how he learned this about American Christians, especially the slave abolitionists. You know some of his name, William Lloyd Garrison. He was the founder of American Anti-Slavery Society back in 1800. He was deeply grounded in his faith in the Bible, where he said, highlighting his speech he gave in 1838 to the society. This is what he says about not only slavery, but also about the war and evil of war. He says, about the measures for abolishing war, came to the conclusion that the establishment of universal peace could be based only on the obvious recognition of the commandments of non-resistance to evil. And you know what happened to slavery in 1865? He was a major force behind slavery, abolishing slavery. Of course, and this is what I want to highlight today, talk about today most of. William Lloyd Garrison was a Knox, but he had been influenced by none other than Christian groups, the community of Knox, known as Quakers, Mennonites, and Amish. They migrated to America as a result of religious persecution back in 1600 and 1700, Quakers from England around 1700, and Mennonites and Amish from Germany and Switzerland, where the first Amish came to settle on Pennsylvania, where their central teachings evolved around the Sermon on the Mount, especially on not resisting evildoer and forgiveness. You see, Amish, you've probably seen some of them, right? Amish lead a very simple life. No cars, they don't drive cars, no modern technology, wearing simple colored clothes, right? But it's not what they wear, but how they practice their religious conviction, how they lead a life as disciples of Jesus Christ for hundreds of years that have impacted our world. It was grounded in the love of forgiveness and love of others, and not resisting evil. This ordinary community of disciples of Jesus Christ, ordinary people who day in and day out are living out the teachings of Jesus, loving the enemies, extending forgiveness, and not resisting evil. In a bulletin, at the back of the bulletin, you see the pictures. It's the photo from the play, The Amish Project. In 2010, it was a play inspired by the West Nickel Mine School shooting incident. Some of you remember that. On October 2nd, 2006, a shooting occurred at the West Nickel Mine School, an Amish one-room schoolhouse in old order Amish community of nickel mines and village or Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. A gunman, Charles Paul Roberts, took hostages and shot 8 out of 10 girls aged between 6 and 13, killing 5 before committing suicide in the schoolhouse. A tragic and horrendous crime, tragedy beyond comprehension, the act of evil at its worst form possible, killing of young, innocent children. So how do you respond to an evil act such as this? Well, this is how the West Nickel Mines Amish community responded collectively. And I want to just read you the article here. On the day of the shooting, a grandfather of one of the murdered Amish girls was heard warning some young relatives not to hate the killer, saying, "We must not think evil of this man." Another Amish father noted he had a mother and a wife and a soul, and now he is standing before a just God. Jack Mayer, a member of the Brethren community living near the Amish in Lancaster County, explained, "I don't think there's anybody here that wants to do anything but forgive, and not only reach out to those who have suffered a loss in that way, but to reach out to the family of the man who committed these acts." A Roberts family, the shooter's family, spokesman said, an Amish neighbor comforted the Roberts family hours after the shooting and extended forgiveness to them. Amish community members visited and comforted Roberts' widow, and parents-in-law, while Amish men held Robert's sobbing father in his arms, reportedly for as long as an hour to comfort him. The Amish have also set up a charitable fund for the family of the shooter. About 30 members of Amish community attended Robert's funeral. And Mary Roberts, the widow of a killer, was one of the few outsiders invited to the funeral of one of the victims. Mary Roberts wrote an open letter to her Amish neighbors, thanking them for their forgiveness and grace and mercy. And she wrote, "Your love for our family has helped to provide the healing we so desperately need. Gifts you have given have touched our hearts in a way no words can describe. Your compassion has reached beyond our family, beyond our community, and is changing our work. And for this, we sincerely thank you." The Amish community responded to that evil act, that horrendous act, in a way that many found surprising. When everyone is focusing on justice and retribution, these ordinary Amish community, even the families who have lost young children, instead extended forgiveness and healing as they grieve the loss of their loved ones. These ordinary disciples of Jesus Christ, the nuts, they saw they were seeking God's righteousness even in times of their death, and evil even in times of their grief. How is it possible? It's incomprehensible for us. Well, the teachings of Jesus was permanently etched into their hearts, into every fabric of their daily life for Amish people for hundreds of years, into their culture and into their DNA. It's their everyday life for many hundreds of years. And because of them, or nuts like them, our world is a much better place because of nuts like them. We are much better because of nuts like them. And this is what the world needs. And the grandmother of the killer, she says, this message is what the world needs. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we are to be the nuts, to go nuts for God's righteousness. And that is the fourth movement in the way of disciple.